Welcome back. Let's now head on over to our politics desk for a brand new segment with our reporter Natasha Phiri to give us the latest on the week that was in our politics wrap. And Natasha, it seems as if it was a very long day for arguments in the Constitutional Court for the Zuma versus IEC matter.
Definitely, Mbali. Thank you so much. And of course, the IEC has told the Constitutional Court that it is duty-bound to overturn the patently incorrect Electoral Court order on the eligibility of former President Jacob Zuma to stand as a candidate, as it runs the risk of producing a disputed outcome in the May polls. The Electoral Court recently upheld Zuma's appeal, against the disqualification of his candidature and found that the Commission erred when it applied Section 47 of the Constitution to Zuma. The IEC, however, stands by its decision and sought finality on the correct interpretation of the section before the Constitutional Court. Of course, SABC News senior reporter Kanima Panga filed this report.
Former President Jacob Zuma failed to secure the recusal of 6 justices from the adjudication of the IEC's appeal against the Electoral Court order, which allowed him to remain on the MK party candidate list. As a result, the IEC proceeded with its appeal against the Electoral Court order, submitting that the court fundamentally erred when it found that a remission of sentence reduced Zuma's sentence from 15 months to 3 months, and emphasized the need for finality on this matter prior to any votes being cast.
Whether he is entitled to contest cannot be established after he has contested. That would be absurd. Finality on the question, therefore, of eligibility must be reached before the 29th of May, not after the 29th of May. The question is, should he be a candidate or not? And the public is entitled to know the answer before it votes. It cannot vote first and find out later that he should not have been a candidate. Secondly, there is a need to safeguard the integrity of the election. If a leader of a contesting political party is allowed to contest while the Constitution disqualifies him, as the second respondent wants to do, because that's what Mr. Zuma wants to do, that will undoubtedly poison the election and produce a disputed outcome.
Friends of the Court, CASA, Corruption Watch and the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation echoed similar sentiments before the Apex Court, highlighting that the section must be read through its purpose to safeguard the National Assembly from those who are unfit to serve in it, and a remission cannot subvert this.
We submit that a remission of sentence is quite different. It does not have the effect of expunging the legal consequences of the conviction and sentence. It is only about the practical question of how much time must this convicted and sentenced person remain in prison in service of that sentence.
The MK party and former President Jacob Zuma opposed the IEC's application, arguing that the question of eligibility lays with the National Assembly, and the IEC had no power to disqualify Zuma. Justice Taron earlier probed counsel for the IEC in the contextual interpretation of Section 47, subsection 1E, highlighting the fact that the drafters were aware of the right of appeal. An argument the MK and Zuma aligned itself with, as the former president's conviction and sentence was not appealable, as it was handed down by the highest court in the land.
Justice Taron is perfectly correct. We have to assume that the drafters of the Constitution knew when they used the word convicted, they didn't just invent it in Section 47. That word is used in Section 35 for the first time. Convicted. There is a presumption of interpretation that a word used in the same constitution or in the same statute has the same meaning. So that's why they didn't say all these things that are now being smuggled in. Well, if the appeal is available and so on. No. They say if you're convicted or sentenced. If you want to know what convicted means, go to Section 35. And Section 35 makes it perfectly clear under what circumstances a person may be convicted, or sentenced for that matter. And those circumstances are that you would have enjoyed all your rights in Section 35.
Judgment was reserved in the matter. Kanima Panga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, joining us for analysis of this week's election-related events is political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley, and he joins us via a hybrid format. Thank you so much for joining us at SABC News on this new segment of Political Wrap. Now, Dr. Dale, perhaps if you'll just start by the first ruling of the Constitutional Court, ruling that those three parties, the Labour Party, the African Alliance of Social Democrats, and Ace Magashule's Act, will be excluded from the ballot paper. What's your analysis on this?
I don't think it's a surprising judgment. I think it was a sort of long shot on the part of those three parties. Their argument was that the IEC website was dysfunctional and they weren't able to load up their candidates and so forth. But I think as the argument showed clearly, all the other parties had no problem doing that. So their argument was fairly weak. I think it was a fairly easy decision for the Constitutional Court to come to in that case. And I think the IEC was vindicated in that case, because they also pointed out that in this case, if they were to rule otherwise, it could cost the taxpayer up to R500 million in extra funds as a result of the delay in the elections, and that would have caused a huge amount of problems. So I don't think, in this case, I think the law was fairly clear and fairly simple.
You also move on to the issue before the IEC, I beg your pardon, before the Concord, where former President Jacob Zuma and the MK party wanted to have the 6 justices actually recuse themselves. And of course, this recusal application was dismissed.
Yeah, I think that this was a fairly, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I think that it was a rational decision. The Constitutional Court is the apex court in our country. There is no one else above that court. And in that context, the argument that, for recusal was that somehow these Constitutional Court judges were biased because they had heard previous cases or had ruled on previous cases involving ex-President Zuma. But I think as the counsel for the IEC pointed out, this would open up a huge can of worms if in fact it was accepted, because that would mean that, in many other cases, the potentiality of having to recuse, and then you would have no quorum in the Constitutional Court, then you would have to bring in interim Constitutional Court judges. It would be a mess. So it seems, I think, to the ordinary person and to myself, I think that this was a rational decision. It was a decision that we have to have, trust in our Constitutional Court. If we begin to start questioning its own decisions in relation to its ability to make these kinds of decisions, and we're always chopping and changing, then I think that that erosion of trust creates much bigger problems than beyond the election. So once again, in my estimation, I think in probably most people's, it was probably the correct decision to make, and the case should proceed. It doesn't prejudice ex-President Zuma in any particular way, I don't believe.
Dr. McKinley, you listened to the arguments today, and for a person who's sitting at home watching us right now, they may be asking themselves what's really at stake here. If the Constitutional Court makes a ruling that the Electoral Court actually erred and that the former President Jacob Zuma should not be allowed to stand in the elections, what then happens? I like the fact that you mentioned that, the IEC also says it costs like over 580 million to actually postpone the election. So in that context, what actually happens? You would know very well that the IEC had said that they are done with the printing of the ballot papers. Some ballot papers actually shipped overseas so that experts to actually vote next week.
Yeah, listen, it's the 10th of May and our elections are on the 29th. So we're talking less than 3 weeks away. And these are really sort of, late night, kinds of maneuvers that are being done here. So it's very, very important that we get clarity. And I think in this particular, the third issue here with regards to ex-President Zuma's eligibility to stand, I think the argument of the IEC is absolutely correct. I'm not making a pronouncement on what the judgment will be, but in terms of the need for clarity and the need for that is exactly why the Constitutional Court exists. And we cannot have, I think the advocate for the IEC was absolutely spot on when he said you cannot have a situation where you go into an election and people are wondering whether or not the candidate is legitimate or not, and then afterwards you have a ruling, maybe so, maybe yes. So it needs to be clear beforehand. It's a very politically volatile kind of decision that's going to be made irrespective of what they decide. People are going to, they're taking sides on this clearly, and people have their particular opinions. But if we are a country that is ruled by law, and we are a country that is governed by the Constitution, then we have to have a situation where the Constitutional Court's rulings are respected. We might disagree with them, and that's fine, and we can argue those things out. But we cannot have a situation where simply because you disagree or you think that they're going to rule against you, then you threaten violence or you threaten something much worse, because then that brings the issue of our elections and the free and fairness of elections into question.
Okay, Mr. McKinley, you'll just park it there for now. I actually want us to actually view some stories that actually made headlines this past week. And of course, you'll analyze that you'll analyze that for us after this. Of course, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa says there's nothing untoward about Zimbabwe's ruling party ZANU-PF's intentions to participate in the main 29 polls as the election observers. Several opposition parties have raised concerns about the issue with the African Transformation Movement, recently writing to the Electoral Commission to raise alarm bells. Ramaphosa made these remarks on the sidelines of the campaign trail in Atteridgeville, west of Pretoria. He says the election observers will not interfere in the outcomes of the elections. ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa taking his party's campaign to Atteridgeville, informally known as Pheli in Tshwane. His first stop was Agnes Mfete's house, where he met his former classmate. After visiting a couple of houses where residents raised issues of lack of service delivery and unemployment, Ramaphosa spent some time at the local Nkomo village mall to engage with the community. His last stop was at the Masopa sports ground, where he addressed community members. The first citizen acknowledged the challenges that were raised and said government was dealing with their various issues. Speaking to the media on the sidelines of the campaign, Ramaphosa poured cold water over claims that allowing ZANU-PF to observe in the national and provincial elections risks tarnishing the legitimacy and credibility of South Africa's electoral process. The president of the ATM, Violet Zungula, has since written to the IEC over the matter.
When elections are held in our country, there's just nothing wrong in saying, hey, fellow sister organization, we are holding elections in South Africa, and come and see how we conduct our elections. When we hold conferences, they also come from all over the world, and we invite them. And similarly, we've also invited other parties to come to observe. Now, an observer mission is not an interfering mission. It's to come and see. They don't interfere, they don't get involved, they just come and observe. It's just as good as saying, other even parties that are not friendly towards us, they also come and observe. They don't interfere. And we welcome their participation, and we are transparent.
Ramaphosa further vowed to step up efforts to deal with criminality in the country. Some communities in Pretoria are living in fear following the recent spate of contract killings, kidnappings, and the construction mafia saga.
We're increasing the number of police so that there can be more visible policing around the country. And where there is visible policing, we are able to address challenges of crime. And we are also strengthening our policing forums, community policing forums. And where they are active, we find that the level of criminal activity also goes down. So many efforts and initiatives are being embarked upon. And we are going to resolve the issue of criminality in our country, just as we are addressing the issue of load shedding.
The ANC president further paid tribute to the late former Constitutional Court Justice Yvonne Mokgoro. She was part of the inaugural judges of the Apex Court and its first woman black judge at the dawn of democracy in 1994.
We are very saddened by the death of Justice Yvonne Mokgoro. She is one of the pioneers in our country in terms of the judiciary. She's one of the very first women to serve on our Constitutional Court. So we remember her fondly and with great sadness, because she served this country with a great deal of diligence on the bench, And she was also an inspiration to many young women and black women who are today on the bench and those who are aspiring to be judges.
Ramaphosa further said government will roll out a service stands program through which communities would be given service stands that will have water, electricity and access to roads. Natasha Phiri, SABC News, Pretoria. DA leader John Steenhuisen says the move by the SABC not to air the DA's election advertisement is politically motivated. Steenhuisen was speaking in Makushane in Phalaborwa, Limpopo during the party's election campaign. The advertisement depicts the South African flag burning. Steenhuisen alleges the move was also influenced by the ANC and that it is against the right to free speech. Kokezo Mutao reports.
The Democratic Alliance election campaign in full swing at the Makushane Tribal Hall in Phalaborwa. DA leader John Steenhuisen was welcomed by some residents and DA supporters. He was invited by residents who say they need change in their village. Steenhuisen said the people of Phalaborwa have been forgotten.
Well, obviously, this is an area where there's a huge unemployment problem, and obviously we want to share our message of hope and change. When I started the campaign, I said that we were going to take our message to every corner of South Africa, both rural and urban. And so yesterday we're in Soweto, today we're here in Phalaborwa, and we'll continue over the next 3 weeks taking our message of hope and change to every single corner of the country. We're out to get as many votes as possible into the box on election day, and that means, because politics is a contact sport, means you've got to be with voters on the ground, and particularly in places here that have been long forgotten by the governing party.
Steenhuisen also said that the SABC's decision not to broadcast the party's election campaign advertisement, which depicts a burning South African flag, is politically motivated. He says the move was influenced by President Cyril Ramaphosa and Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Zizi Kodwa, who are both ANC members. Steenhuisen says the party will continue to take legal actions against the public broadcaster because other broadcasters are airing the advertisement.
Well, our lawyers are busy drafting a letter to them, putting them on notice that they will be given a few days to change their decision. If not, we will seek a review of that decision in the High Court. And as I said, because this is such an important constitutional principle around freedom of expression, freedom of political thought and speech, that we will be prepared to take this all the way to the Constitutional Court. We had the same issue the last time, you may recall, around an SMS that was distributed. And the ruling in that case was that it doesn't matter. Political speech must be protected and political parties must be allowed to get their message out there.
The SABC says it has informed the regulator, the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, that it will not broadcast the advertisement. The public broadcaster says it believes that the advertisement encourages the damaging of treasured national symbols. Meanwhile, these residents of Makushane in Phalaborwa says the DA is their last hope for service delivery in their area.
DA, as the organized political party, we think will bring changes on corruption, which is done by the governing party right now. And the DA will produce more than 2 million job opportunities. And people from around this area, we are suffering from water, electricity. Knowing DA, we know that the DA will make life better for all of us.
I'm glad to be here today, and I want to welcome our president. For the first time, we're having a president here for DA at Phalaborwa as a whole. Everything that I will challenge the new youth, let's stop arguing about the 1930 that we are not there for apartheid. Now it's time for the change. It's time to rescue South Africa. It's time to rescue Phalaborwa. If it doesn't understand the name rescue, it's to save someone from danger. DA is here to rescue us from the poverty, for load shedding, jobless, whatever the crisis that we have.
I'm so happy about DA. DA, he can stop all things here in South Africa for corruption. So I'm so happy because you can stop that things here.
The area of Phalaborwa has been experiencing various protests over the poor service delivery. Residents say that they believe that after the May 29 general elections, things will improve. I'm Koke Chomodao, SABC News, Phalaborwa.
Well, we take this conversation back to Dr. Dale McKinley. Dr. McKinley, I trust that you've been hearing and listening to the packages that we're playing. Of course, the pertinent issue of today also was the issue around Zimbabwe's ZANU-PF, the ruling party over there. A lot of political parties have been complaining and actually raising concerns over the observer mission status to South Africa. And of course, we heard ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa saying, listen, there's nothing untoward about it. Them being an observer mission to the country doesn't mean interference. And what do you have to say about this?
Well, technically, the president is correct that, election observers are here to observe. They don't have any particular role to play other than to do that. But I think the controversy was unnecessary. ZANU-PF is not known for running free and fair elections in their own country. So it's a bit, I think tactically, it's not a particularly smart move to be inviting political parties. It would be like possibly inviting Kim Jong-un from North Korea to observe democratic elections when there is no democracy in that country. So in many cases, I think election observers are good. And the president is correct that it doesn't have to be someone you agree with. It doesn't have to be your allies or your others. And election observers should be welcomed. But I think in this case, it was a tactically not a particularly smart decision to invite ZANU-PF.
I also want you to move on to that DA package that was compiled by our reporter in Limpopo. And of course, this has also, caused a bit of controversy where the SABC has said that it's taken a decision not to broadcast the DA's national elections advertisement because it depicts the burning of the South African flag. And of course, the DA wanting to take further action against the SABC on the matter. The DA also saying that it's a metaphor for what's actually happening in the country right now.
Look, this is a tricky one because people feel, South Africans feel, and understandably so, quite protective of the symbol of the flag and what it represents. But we do have a constitution and we do have laws, and those laws protect freedom of expression. And so in this case, I think it would be useful for that principle to be tested. This would not be the first time. We can cite, for example, there are cases in the United States, there's cases in other countries where people have burnt flags, at rallies, at other kinds of things, flags they don't like of their own country or of other parties or other things. And these have been causing great amounts of controversy. But as much as we might disagree and as strong the opinions we have, again, if we're a country based on the rule of law and our courts, then that's where it should go. And we should have an interpretation on this that is clear. Because if we have the public broadcaster or any other public entity simply making decisions based upon their political opinions, then that's a very slippery slope.
Another issue that actually made headlines earlier on this week was the issue of the MK party. You have Jabulani Khumalo in a letter dated the 5th of May, basically saying that former President Jacob Zuma, is not the face and the leader of the MK party, occupies that position in an illegal manner. And then there was a letter that emerged on the 9th of April saying that he gives over the party and the party leader is actually former President Jacob Zuma. Of course, the signatures are not the same on the letter, but then after there emerges a letter from the Electoral Commission confirming that the leader of the party, as they know it, is former President Jacob Zuma. But then writing to the to the Constitutional Court, you have Mr. Khumalo saying that that letter is indeed fraudulent. What do you make of this?
The word I would use was, it's a mess. It really doesn't look particularly good for the MK party. And in some ways, I guess it's not that surprising. This was a party that was only formed very, very recently. From the very beginning, when Mr. Khumalo was outed or surfaced as the person who registered the party, people were asking immediately, well, who is this person? Who are these people that are behind MK? Because clearly we know that it's ex-President Zuma that's the main person here. So I think there were a lot of questions from the beginning, and then we see what this internal ructions that supposedly the allegations that in fact Khumalo and a crew there were spying for the enemy and were taking money and all sorts of other kinds of things. I think what it tells us is that the MK's party is really about one thing, and that's ex-President Zuma. It's clear that he's the main person. He and his close allies, his daughter in particular, they're the ones that are really calling the shots. And I think Mr. Khumalo and others who might have thought that they could sort of move on the coattails of President Zuma are finding it a very difficult lesson, that he's a very shrewd political operator and someone who is not going to brook any kind of opposition or dissent or anybody that crosses him. So I think in that case, it's not surprising. I think for the electoral prospects of MK, it doesn't look particularly good, because if people are looking to vote for a particular party, they're looking for that party to look good. In other words, to say that it's unified, it's not fighting battles leading right up to the elections, and that they can trust that party, or they can believe in the message that the party is putting forward to the public. And I think in that case, the real political damage here is to the MK's electoral prospects more than anything else.
Dr. McKinley, thank you so much for your time and thanks for your analysis. Thank you. Well,
Thank you so
Mbali,
much. My pleasure.
interesting times ahead of us. We are 19 days away from those May 29 polls. And remember, 70 political parties and 11 independent candidates are contesting in these national and provincial elections. Interesting times ahead of us. But of course, Mbali, I will be joining you again on Monday for the segment that starts at 9:30. It's a political wrap. And of course, we are wrapping up the political stories that made headlines throughout the week. And of course, previewing what is happening in the following week.
I like the fact that you use the word interesting times with the doc there saying that it is indeed a mess, especially when it comes to that last story that you were covering when it comes to the MK party. And Natasha, thank you so much for your time, and she'll be back again with you on Monday at 9:30, where she'll be giving you a wrap of the stories in politics.